But you might have a revenue problem, or your overhead could be a little bit out of control. And so here I want to show you how to do some pretty cool stuff to where we can calculate all of the overhead expenses, like line item by line item, create a heat map with that, create this line chart here, this combo chart, and then also set up a benchmark where you can have a benchmark here. And then finally, these little, they call this sparklines, but sparklines as well, just where you can see like a mini line chart in a single cell. Okay, so in this data set here, let me make this. In this data set right here, you have sort of all of your expenses. This is just a dummy data set. I know, it's going to be all over the place for you. But if you can get it organized in such a way to where it looks like this or something similar, then you can create those things. You can create, like those calculations. And so the first thing we need to do is let's just get month here so we can break it down by month. And then we can just drag it down, just type in the word January, and then drag it down to December. And then the next thing we need to do is we need to get all of these expenses here, and then sum of all the expenses, and then also bring in revenue just so we can do this percentage. So we have revenue here, and then we have all of the expenses, and then total overhead. And of course you could just sum this here and do the sum this way, but with the heat map, it'll help you see sort of month by month, like the variation in your expenses. And so what I'll do here is just copy this, and then I'll just bring this right here. And then if you highlight the columns and then just double click, it'll sort of auto space everything. Okay, so the formula we're going to use for this is the SUMIFS. And if you've watched any of my videos, the SUMIFS, it's a very powerful function, and it's a very simple function once you learn how to use it. And it's going to sum something if something else, meaning sum revenue if the month is January. And so that's what we're going to want here is like sum the revenue if the month is January. But in other data sets, if you watch any of my other stuff, there's going to be a bunch of columns, service type. You'll also have maybe commercial versus residential, and you can also have, at the truck level, at the salesperson level, to where you could do the same type of calculations. But for this example, we're just going to do it based off a month. So the first argument here is the sum range. So where's the numerical value that you're trying to sum? And that's right here. And then comma. And then the next thing is the criteria range. So in this example, the criteria is going to be the month, right? So this month. Don't do the date column because we're gonna be searching for essentially the word January. And so here it has the word January. And then of course it would go down to February, March, April. Okay, so we have that. And then the next thing we need to do is just click on January and then press enter. And so you can see your revenue for the month was 1.3 million. And to format it as a dollar, you can just press Control Shift and the number 4 on your keyboard at the same time. And then we can just center this and then remove the decimals. So now if you drag this down, it's perfect. Like it works by every month. But the problem is if you drag this across, you get nothing. And the reason is because the cells, the ranges are changing here. So in other words, C turns into D because we're going over. And then B turns into C, and then B3 turns into C3. And so we need to fix that. So meaning, as I drag this over, I do want this to change to D, because if you remember in the data set, next to revenue was admin salaries, then office, that rent, then IT. But for column B, where the month is, as we go over, we don't want it to change. We want it to stay the month column. And then the same thing with B3 here. As we drag it left to right, we want it to stay the month of January, but as we drag it top to bottom, we want it to change January, February, March. And so that's called absolute and relative referencing. So for the sum column, we do want that to change to D and then E and then F. But for the month column, we don't ever want this to change. So just press the F4 key or put a dollar sign. You can manually type in a dollar sign before the letter. That's an option. And then for this, we want to lock the column. So if we drag it over, the column doesn't change, but if we drag it up and down, the row does change. And so you need to put the dollar sign before the letter. So dollar sign B3. And so if I did this right, then you can copy and then paste. And so now you can see everything is automatically, sort of filled in. It's really, quite useful. Let me just center this right here. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to get total overhead. So we can just say total overhead. And that's a simple sum, right? A simple sum of this. And then again, you can just copy this and then paste it down. Now I'm just going to center all this. Let me just center this. Okay, so the final thing we need to do is we need to get right here the percentage of revenue and a benchmark. So percent, you can say, overhead as a percentage of revenue, however you want to title it. So percent of revenue, and that's super simple, equals this divided by this. And now you have a percent. And if you remember how we did the dollar sign by pressing Control Shift 4, you can do the percent sign by pressing Control Shift 5. And then just copy it down, and you can see it looks like it's all the same, but there is some variation in that. Okay, so now let's just add a benchmark. And what I'll do is I'll just type in 20%, and then under here I'll do equals this. Equals the number above it, because as I drag it down, what it does is it makes this cell dynamic, right? So as I change one, everything will change. Okay, so the next thing, we can do the heat map first, or we can do the chart, but let's just do the heat map. So there's certain things, so like here, you want the highest value to be favorable. I mean, we can do green, you can do any color, but we'll just do green, and then the low value's red. But for all of the other things, it's the high value red, and the green, and the low value green. And so I'll show you what I mean. So here is just conditional formatting. So home, conditional formatting, color scales, and you can sort of see the little box. At the top, it's green, and that's what we want. So high values green. But for the other ones, we want the low values green. And so instead of highlighting everything, because if you do this and then, color scales like this, it doesn't make sense, because of course, like this is the highest number, right? So we want to go column by column in conditional format. And so highlight the column, click conditional formatting, color scales, and then the second one. And again, you can do however you want. You could also create your own rules, and you can create your own colors. I mean, yeah. So there's a lot of ways to do this, but just to keep the video short, let's do color scales like this. And then instead of going and doing it, 6 times, there's a trick you can do. And so highlight that same range, January to December, go to home, and then double click here. And then after doing that, you can just click the first value, the January value in each of these, and it works. And this last one, just press Control Shift 5 again, and Control Shift 5, and then you can get the percentage. Okay, so the next thing, before we do the actual chart, let's do the sparklines. And so what I'll do is I'll click here, and then go to Insert, and then you'll see a line, and underneath it says sparklines, but you can see a line. Click here, and then the data range is this, and then OK. And then if you want to do, say, a high point and a low point, just click in that cell. So if you don't click here, you'll see after help, there's nothing. But if you do click in here, you'll see there's a sparkline tab. So click that tab, and then just do the high point and the low point, and then you can just drag this over. And you can see the high point and the low point. I mean, it's not too bad, I guess. Like, in other words, it's like, okay, this is the 4th one, so that's April, right? The 4th month. But you can just sort of, if you were to just quickly visualize it, it's like, okay, beginning of the year was the low point, end of the year was the high point. We did our best month at the end of the year here, as far as revenue goes. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to create this chart here, and this is going to show revenue as a column, and then percent of overhead as a line, and then a benchmark. So to do that, let's just highlight month in revenue, and then hold down the Control key, and then highlight percent of revenue. And then go to recommended charts, and it's right here. It's the first one. And if you don't see it there for some reason, you will, but if you don't, click on all charts and go to combo here at the bottom. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing the line at the very bottom. And the reason is because it's, 25%, and the axis is 1.6 million. So it's clearly, it's not going to make much sense. And so what you can do is just click on the secondary axis where the line, just click that box, and now you have a secondary axis here. And so now the percentages are easier to understand. Okay, so let's just make this a darker color, and then we can say overhead, you can just do percent of revenue, or you can type out percentage, or you can do, percent, percentage, however you want to do it. I'll just type it out. Percentage of revenue. Then let me make it just a little bit smaller, just so it'll fit on one line. Okay, so that's how you do that. And then finally, and I'll show you a little trick here, but what we can do from here is the last thing we need this benchmark. And all you have to do, which is really cool, is just highlight this, press Control C to copy, click on the chart, and press Control V to paste. And you can see that the line is right there, which is good. And so the next thing is, let's just format this. So just double click this line. Make sure you see that little square, just click out and then click back in, because you want the whole line to be sort of highlighted. And then you can go to solid line, and then just, pick whatever color you like. Let's just do gray. And then if you want to sort of change like to dash marks or something like that, you can do that. And then if you want the values and you click the crosshair and go to data labels, it's way too noisy. But if you wanted just a single, I guess, like KPI value, like just revenue, then click just the columns and then click on data labels, and then you can see it that way. And that's not too bad. I guess with this one, if you double click there, we can sort of move it maybe right there. Okay, a little bit better. And so, yeah, that is how you can calculate that. One more thing to do, because like this isn't showing much variation, the line, if you can change the axis, the min and the max. If you double click, then you click on the little column here, and then you go to axis options, you can change it. So let's see, 0.15, right? So you can see a little more variation. If we did 0.2, yeah, 0.2 maybe, that'll work. Yeah, and so you can see a little more variation, but what you're going to see is the benchmarks on the bottom. But the benefit is we made it dynamic. So if you change this to 25, then it'll automatically update, and you can sort of see what months are above and below. But anyways, that's all I got for this video. If you want this file, there's a link in the description if you made it this far. And also, if you have any questions on this stuff, just leave a comment, or you can shoot me an email. questions@databoards.io. And if you need some help, with your data, or if there's any KPIs that I'm not covering that you'd like to see or learn a little bit more about, there's going to be a link. One, you can email me, but two, there's going to be a link in the description to a form that you can just fill it out to, to set up a time to chat with me, and we can just go from there. But if that's not interesting for you, then I will see you in future videos. I'm going to be doing 160 HVAC videos, and so there's already a library of some that you can watch if you're interested. And so, yeah, so there's still, quite a few more that I'm going to be making, and so, yeah, stay tuned.